You walk into an old school, a hospital corridor, or a historic home, and your hand lands on a brass door handle. Most people barely notice it. If they do, they usually file it away as part of the building's age, its style, or its old-fashioned charm. But that small piece of metal may have been doing more than simply looking elegant. Behind it sits a story that reaches into science, history, and public health. So here is the real question. Are brass doorknobs naturally antibacterial? And if they are, why are they no longer everywhere today? To answer that, we first have to look at what brass actually is. Let's get into it right here on Secrets of Simple Things. More than a beautiful metal, brass is an alloy, which means it is made by combining metals rather than using one alone. In most cases, it is made primarily from copper and zinc. Change the balance between those two ingredients, and brass can shift from a soft golden yellow to a deeper reddish tone. It can also become softer or harder depending on how it is mixed and worked. For centuries, people valued brass for reasons that were easy to see. It looked warm and refined. It resisted corrosion better than many other metals. In homes, schools, stations, and public buildings, it gave ordinary objects a durable presence. It felt dependable and made to last. But that visible appeal was only part of the story. Brass was not just useful because it looked good and lasted a long time. Hidden inside the material was another advantage, one most people would never notice by sight alone. It did not simply decorate a space. It could also help protect it in a quiet, invisible way every day. And that hidden benefit is what made brass more than just a decorative choice. Why germs struggle to stay on brass? That hidden advantage comes from something called the oligodynamic effect. The name sounds technical, but the idea is straightforward. Certain metals, especially copper and silver, have natural antimicrobial properties. Because brass contains copper, it shares part of that ability. This is not an old superstition or a romantic story attached to historic buildings. It is a scientifically observed effect. When bacteria, viruses, or fungi land on a brass surface, the copper inside the alloy begins to interfere with them. Copper ions can damage the microbe's outer membrane, disrupt internal processes, and make it harder for the organism to survive or reproduce. In simple terms, brass does not remain passive in the way plastic or stainless steel does. It pushes back, slowly but continuously, against the microbes sitting on it. That does not mean a brass door handle is some instant self-cleaning miracle. It is not magic and it does not replace cleaning. But it does mean the surface can naturally reduce microbial survival over time. That matters on objects people touch again and again each day, especially in places where many hands pass over the same spot. Researchers have found that E. coli can die off on brass within a matter of hours. Other dangerous pathogens, including MRSA, have also been shown to be vulnerable on copper-containing metals like brass. So that old brass handle was not only there to look solid and elegant, it may also have been doing invisible work every day. Once that becomes clear, the brass fixtures in older buildings stop looking like style alone and start looking like a practical decision. People used it before they could fully explain it. Long before people could describe microbes in scientific terms, they were already noticing that some materials behaved differently from others. Ancient Egyptians, for example, used copper vessels to store water and even used copper in treating wounds. They did not have modern language for ion disruption or microbial membranes, but they could still observe that copper seemed to help in ways other materials did not. That same pattern appeared again much later. By the Victorian era, brass had become common in public architecture, not only because it looked refined, but because it was durable and seemed suited to places used by many people. In hospitals, that logic became even more practical. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, door handles, bed rails, IV stands, and even light switches were often made from brass or bronze. The people making those choices were not working from a complete microbiological theory. They were responding to patterns they had seen. Illness seemed less likely to linger on certain surfaces even before the science was fully in place to explain why. This was one of those moments where architecture and microbiology met long before they were fully introduced to each other. What looked like decoration on the surface was also becoming a quiet form of protection in some of the places that needed it most. But if brass had all of that going for it, the next part of the story becomes the real surprise. The hidden trade-off of modern materials. If brass had such a useful quality built into it, why did so many buildings move away from it? The answer is not that brass stopped working. The answer is that other materials gradually became more attractive for different reasons. Over the past several decades, stainless steel, plastic, and aluminum replaced brass in many schools, hospitals, offices, and public buildings. They were often cheaper, easier to produce at scale, and more in line with modern design preferences. Stainless steel, in particular, became the visual winner. It looks sleek, it resists corrosion, it does not tarnish the way brass does. It also carries a strong visual association with cleanliness. A bright steel surface feels clinical, modern, and controlled, which made it especially appealing in places where hygiene mattered. But that is where the trade-off begins. Materials like stainless steel and plastic may look cleaner, yet they do not offer the same natural antimicrobial effect that brass does. Unlike brass, they do not actively interfere with microbes on their surfaces. In fact, bacteria can remain on stainless steel and plastic for days, sometimes longer, depending on the conditions. That means the shift to modern materials may have done more than change the look of public spaces. It may also have increased the opportunity for microbial transmission on high-touch surfaces, especially in places where many people pass through every day. That is why some researchers have argued that brass or copper-based alternatives deserves another look, not out of nostalgia, but out of concern for safety. It is a story about trade-offs. We gained surfaces that were cheaper, brighter, and easier to standardize. But we may also have given up a passive layer of protection that older buildings had built quietly into the objects people touched. Why brass didn't come back? Even once the antimicrobial value of brass became clearer, that did not automatically bring it back. Knowing that a material has a useful property is one thing. Building systems around that property is another. One reason is simple: cost. Brass is more expensive than plastic or aluminum, and in construction projects, even small differences in unit price can add up quickly. Then there is maintenance. Brass changes over time. As it oxidizes, it develops a brown or greenish patina. That surface change does not erase its antimicrobial effect, but it does change how people see it. In many modern interiors, tarnish reads as age, wear, or neglect rather than usefulness. By contrast, polished stainless steel keeps signaling what many people want to see: brightness, order, and visible cleanliness. And that points to the deeper issue. This is not only about engineering or budgets, it is also about perception. People often trust what looks clean, even when science suggests appearance is not the whole story. Brass has the disadvantage of doing its work quietly. It does not advertise itself. It darkens. It ages. It asks people to value a function that is largely invisible. That is a hard sell in a world shaped by cost calculations, design trends, supply chains, and visual impressions. So the question is no longer whether brass can help. It is whether modern systems know how to value that kind of help. Could it matter again? Brass has not disappeared completely. Interest in copper-based surfaces has started to return in a more deliberate way. Some hospitals have experimented with copper-infused materials in high-touch areas, hoping to reduce microbial survival on the surfaces people contact most often. Early results have been described as promising, which is one reason the idea continues to attract attention. But that does not mean brass is about to sweep back into every public building. Adoption moves slowly for reasons that have little to do with whether the material works. Regulations matter. Building codes matter. Supply chains matter. So does the simple inertia of existing infrastructure. It is one thing to demonstrate a benefit in research. It is another to redesign standards, replace familiar materials, and persuade institutions to change course. So the more realistic question is not whether brass will suddenly return everywhere. It is whether, in a world increasingly interested in passive, low-maintenance ways to improve public health, materials like brass may start to look useful again. Not revolutionary, not magical, just quietly valuable in a way modern design may have overlooked. And that brings the story back to the object where it began. A door handle that was doing more than we realized. A brass door handle in an old building can seem like a small leftover from another era, the kind of detail people notice only as part of the decor. But the story behind it is much larger than style. What looked like a simple design choice may also have been a material choice with hidden practical value, one working at a microscopic level every time a hand reached for it. That is what makes this detail so interesting. It sits at the intersection of science, history, architecture, and public health, all without drawing attention to itself. And maybe that is the bigger lesson here. The smartest part of a design is not always the part that looks newest, brightest, or most advanced. Sometimes it is the part that does its job quietly in the background, day after day, without asking to be noticed. Sometimes the most interesting part of an old building is not what people stop to admire, but what they touch without ever thinking about it. If something as ordinary as a brass door handle could quietly do more than most people realized, what other everyday details do you think we have been overlooking all this time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy uncovering the hidden logic behind simple things, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next story.